I'd argue you're causing division by literally pointing out in the current climate where there is so much hate directed towards the Jews to pick on the one Jewish state when whatever you're saying could be applied to Ukraine, to the US, to the UK.
Yeah, fair point.
Doesn't that make much more sense than the Mossad getting involved in that?
Look. That could be plausible, right? I just personally.
Do you not think it's more plausible? I'm hoping you like my T-shirt, because if you like it enough, you can...
I did see it. I can't see it now. What's it say?
Defund the politicians. It's taking the defund the police logo. And
yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, fine. That's fine.
You're happy with it? All right.
Well, I'll be... yeah, I mean, I could very well be defunded in a couple of months anyway. So, yeah.
I can... So I guess we can expect, if you don't get defunded, we can expect you to be wearing one of these that you got from rebelstore.com.au. At your next appearance in Parliament, and we promise not to use the money that we raised from the sale for our Mossad activities here in Australia.
Okay, that's good. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for coming on, Senator. I've long admired most of your work, I'd say, particularly during COVID. That's where I really got to know you. But lately, though, a couple of your posts have, I'd say... I've got some alarm bells ringing, so I'm genuinely grateful that you've come on today to help me unpack them. Welcome.
Yeah.
Now...
Welcome. It's great to be here. Thanks, Avi.
I don't think we've never met, have we?
No.
No. Okay. Well, it's good to meet you. Firstly, I want to start with your post last week. It's the post where you're essentially sharing your question time or the Senate inquiry, whatever it is, and you're questioning... the ASIO boss. Now, on your post in which you shared it, you're just asking the question, which nowadays online, let's be honest, when people are just asking online, it's generally that you don't have to commit to it, but you're implying something. You're implying what you're saying, but you're not committing to what you're saying. You're giving yourself a way out, because then if anyone challenges you on it, you just say, hold on, I was just asking questions. I don't know why you have a problem with people asking questions. I think asking questions is great, but you need to commit to what you're actually saying. In that one, you're saying, you're questioning whether the Mossad, so the Israeli intelligence, has infiltrated News Corp and is trying to stir up division here in Australia. It's in reference specifically to two news stories. You've got the caravan in Sydney found full of explosives, and you've got the Cairo Cafe stunt by the Daily Telegraph. Let's start with the first one.
Yeah.
How would you want the caravan found full of explosives, how would you want that reported by News Corp in a way that you wouldn't say that there was, or question whether there was any intelligence by Mossad pulling the strings behind the scene?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the reference to Mossad was in regards to the Egyptian cafe, not the caravan one.
Okay. So
yeah. So I'm not tying Mossad to the caravan one, but I will stick the boot in the sky and use
that's
for inflating the caravan one. Now I think that's still being investigated, so we'll just be careful.
The caravan one.
But
sure.
The day after the hate speech laws were passed, then an article came out by Jeff Chambers in the Australian where they said that basically the explosives had been there for 2 decades. There were no detonators, and they didn't seem to think it was a terrorist act or related to terrorism. Now, initially, there was a lot of hysteria around that type of reporting. And it was also, and I said this in the chamber, that it was connected to a couple of meth heads who somehow got tied to it. And I just looked at them and I thought, either these guys are acting as meth heads, or they're either actors as meth heads, or if they're really meth heads, I just, for the life of me, can't see how they would possibly get themselves involved in, getting explosives with no detonators. And then there was supposedly something written. I think this is where we need to be careful. That's the bit they're still investigating, is who wrote the note. But the Mossad comment was in regards to the Egyptian cafe.
It kind of changes things, because in your second post you refer. I know in your second post you refer, and we're going to get to that in a minute, where you refer to false flag operations that Israel has allegedly or conducted in the past, and so you're not tying that the explosives in the caravan to that. So you're happy to just see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Do you think it's
that
possible
one,
that was a potential targeted attack against the Jewish community? Or
look, I don't know, but I mean, it's if they're doing it, they're not doing a very good job, because apparently those explosives have been there for two decades or decades, and there's no detonators. And in the Australians' own words, 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, they seem to think, and this, we just don't want to say too much, because they said last week they're still talking about it, but it didn't seem to be a terrorist act. That's what Jeff Chambers said in the Australian.
Well,
but so
if
when
it comes out that it
went
was,
up,
you'll accept it. You're
absolutely.
not.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So the second one,
Yeah.
specifically about the Cairo Cafe stunt by the Daily Telegraph, I got to say I do agree with the ASIO boss when he called it. I don't know what his exact words, but he was essentially calling it foolish. But his second comment on that, he didn't seem to know much about it. He was kind of basing off what you were telling him. So he said to you, if what you're saying is true, he would say, think about the person on the receiving end of that. So I guess my question to you is, I agree with you, absolutely foolish, especially the way it was executed, right? But do you know why they targeted the Cairo Cafe? Do you know anything about?
Yeah, I didn't when I posted last week, but they've been posting stuff as well, which they shouldn't be posting. Well, in free speech world you can, but as I always say, I believe in free speech, but we should try and be respectful of everyone, right? And so we don't want to go around flaming tensions when tensions are already ultra inflamed at the moment. Because I'm a big believer that Australia is actually a very tolerant country, and what we probably intolerate the most is hysteria. So I arc up whenever I see media over egging stuff, and that's why I attacked Sky News Corp, who are, generally, me being right of centre, I agree with News Corp more often than not. But on this particular thing, I was livid with them for doing it, because whilst I don't live in Sydney myself, tensions down there are pretty ripe at the moment, and we don't need to make matters any worse. And after News Corp's getting all self-righteous about anti-Semitism, which fair enough, for them to go around baiting in that cafe example, and even regardless of what these guys had said earlier, they shouldn't, for the media to do it. You guys are the last ones to go around inflaming anything.
So I accept.
They do it all the time, and it's not just in regards to this issue.
So I accept that. I accept that it certainly wasn't executed well. But my question is, do you know what the cafe did post prior to them setting up that stunt? That
I didn't when I posted last week, but I've subsequently
so the owner posted that
they posted offensive stuff last year as well.
Well, he was telling his audience on Instagram, Zionist pigs, to stay away from his venue. Okay, so do you think Mossad, because you're saying that in relation to that story, you think that the Mossad is involved. So do you think the Mossad got him to write that, or to get the Daily Telegraph to go there and do what exactly do you think that the Mossad is doing in that story to, in your words, incite the racism?
Okay, so I don't think they would have got the Egyptian guy to write what they wrote.
You agree that he would have done that on his own?
And I don't know. When I beg the question, you're right in the sense that I don't know, but I am begging the question because, we know, and I've discussed this, and my view is ASIO has intelligence assets inside the media today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think CIA, it's well known, Operation Mockingbird, it was exposed back in the 70s. You can pretty much look at most of your mainstream media today, and they just parrot the same talking points from the government. But no, so my reference and my question is the guy that wore the skull cap, he could be a Mossad agent. Was he a Mossad agent? Contacted the media, and the Daily Telegraph should have told them, because apparently they did contact another Jewish agency who said we're not interested, and I'm glad they said that. But clearly this bloke decided he was interested and then went to that cafe, because I don't know who the lady was, but she had knocker accent on the clip. So she certainly wasn't going to get baited. But that stunt was a stupid stunt.
I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing the stupid stunt. I'm trying to work out where you think that the Mossad potentially is involved in controlling News Corp. So
the potential connection is the guy that wore the skull cap. Now I don't know that he is. I'm not saying he is. right? But the point is that it wouldn't be hard. I mean, Mossad's the second biggest espionage agency in the world after the CIA, right? So if they wanted to get at these guys, they could do it. I mean, Mossad
Sure,
could do
sure. I
anything
guess
they wanted to. Yeah,
what would be in it for Mossad to target that cafe in that way and to get that? Why?
because it would suit their narrative to inflame tensions.
Do you really think that the Mossad is spending any resources in changing opinions here in Australia? Is there really that much of a need for Mossad to incite racism in a Sydney cafe? For what reason? I don't get what the outcome is. My question.
Okay.
My question is.
Well, no, that's a good question,
Yeah.
Avi. Can I answer that one?
Yeah.
So there is no need for them to do it, and they shouldn't do it,
Sure,
right?
I agree.
The problem is Mossad, just like every other government agency, becomes a hammer looking for a nail, right? So, was there a need to invade Iraq when there were when there were no chemical weapons in Iraq? I mean, at the end of the day, they contrived the story, and they just, the West. Not this isn't well, it may or may not be, but like the West, let's just call it the West. Went and invaded a country there, right? Was there any need to overthrow a democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014? Just because there's no need to do something doesn't mean to say. I mean, I'm just today trying to apply for GST, and I've got to, I've been told I've got to get a digital ID. It's not my director's ID, and my gov doesn't work. Do I need 6 or 7 different bits of regulation to get something done? Of course not. But they make rules, they do things, they create reasons. So Mossad, just like any other agency,
Sure. I accept that.
Becomes a hammer looking for a nail.
I can accept that, but my question in this particular scenario, does it not make more sense? So let me give you another example of something, another scenario, and tell me if you think another agency would take advantage of it. So let's say it was a shop that had posted online saying no white colonizers allowed in here, and then some proud Aussie thought, you know what? I'm going to do a stunt. I'm going to wrap myself in an Australian flag. I'm going to tell the press I'm going to this place. I'm going to be wrapped in an Australian flag because we know what they're saying about Aussies. And so they're going to have a reaction that you can capture on camera. Now, up to the journalist whether they go ahead and copy it. But is that not a much more likely scenario that they upset a local Jew in Sydney who goes, I've got a great idea. These guys are telling Zionists they're not allowed in, so I'm going to wrap myself in a. I think he was wearing an Israeli cap. I don't know, an Israeli. So he wasn't even wearing a skull cap. I think he was just wearing an Israeli. Hat. And that was really what. Again, still a foolish decision, but I don't see if there's any evidence of a Mossad connection here, and I'd be with you if there was, if there really was some sort of connection to any security force kind of driving racism, I'd be with you. But I think here it's pretty clear. It seems like there's a clear story here. There's a cafe that told a certain part of the Australian community, you're not welcome in my shop because of who you are. So one of those people that were targeted by that decided, you know what, let's test your theory, and I'll invite the media to join me on that test. Doesn't that make much more sense than the Mossad getting involved in that?
Look, that could be plausible, right? I just personally...
Do you not think it's more plausible?
I don't know, is the answer. I don't know. I mean, in the same clip that when Channel 9 posted it, that guy was also calling for respect for each other, right? So, I don't know. Is the answer.
Sure, but let's go to the second. Let me give you this back to the scenario that I gave you, that it was an Aussie wrapped in an Australian flag. And if at the end of it he was on a Channel 9 clip and he was saying we should all respect each other because we're in Australia and we're all Australians, would you think that that's another government agency? It's the same thing. It's just being applied with somebody who was the target of it, wearing an Israeli flag. That's the only part of this puzzle that makes you, I guess, jump to the question of whether the Mossad had any involvement in it, when it's pretty obvious. Especially, maybe it's more obvious to me because I'm a Jew and I've lived in the last 18 months, often on the receiving end of a lot of that hate. So I know exactly how the community is feeling, and I know how easy it is for one. And I, in fact, know who the person is, and I know he's not a Mossad agent. Unless you think I'm a Mossad agent. Do you think I'm a Mossad agent? I'd be the worst Mossad
Well,
agent.
you could be, because here's the thing: you're not going to tell me you're an intelligent asset, right?
I would.
I assume, and look,
Okay.
this isn't a Jewish thing. You understand this. I mean, Alexander will tell you this, right? I say all the time in my role as a senator, I must have spoken to now people who have been intelligence assets or not who they say they are,
Yep.
to sound me out. And as I say, I don't really care because I put everything out on Facebook, right? So I'm not one of these people
Yeah.
that plays my cards close to the chest. I'm a total open book. That's why I'm here
Mate,
today.
you came on this show when I asked you. You said yes straight away.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's. That's not my questions here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, right? Like that's the whole thing. And I mean, it's terrible to say this, but I just don't trust anyone anymore.
Sure.
After all the crap and all the lies,
Yep.
like I'm a complete and utter cynic. And the more the hysteria I see, so it's like, I mean, I've had conversations where people around climate change, where I have sat down and I have done the physics, and I've done, gone right back to Isaac Newton's, theory of universal gravity, then tied that into the ideal gas law, blah 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 blah. Treat it like in a conversation like this, and at the end of the conversation, I'm still called a climate denier, right?
Yep.
And so I've come from being a climate denier to an anti-vaxxer, despite the fact I invested in gene technology stocks prior to becoming a senator. My own son's allergic to penicillin, another one's allergic to pecans and walnuts, another daughter's allergic to nickel. So it's whenever I see the hysteria get ramped up, I'm immediately like, what is the hysteria all about here?
I think that's done. I think COVID has done that.
Because
I think COVID has done that to a lot of people, and I agree with you. And that's why I say I admired a lot of your work, especially during COVID. But let's be clear, I am not a Mossad agent. I would be the worst Mossad agent in the world because, like there's photos of me in the Israeli army. I don't shy away from the fact that I served, and I'm proud Israeli. I'm an Australian first. I'm Israeli second. And I think that do not conflict at all because for me, it's about morals. I think that if either country was hijacked by, let's say, a radical communist regime, then I wouldn't stand for no matter which country it was, because for me it's about values. But here,
can we talk about that in a minute?
Sure.
Because I want to talk about our values as a country, both Australia, Israel, and whoever else, right? Because this is where I've got a real beef at the moment, and I'll take it out on Sky News here. 20 years ago, they were egging on the Iraqi war and the chemical weapons of mass destruction, right? We have a Muslim problem or a Muslim assimilation problem today here in Australia.
Absolutely.
Now, part of that, not all of it, has been a result of the bombing. We have bombed the crap out of the Middle East in the last 20 years, and we have got I don't know if the flood of refugees is the right way to describe it, but we have created a problem in the Middle East, and some of that's come here to Australia.
Sure. Two things can be true at the same time. Our involvement in Middle East conflicts, absolutely, some of them were wrong. And this is coming from someone that I was a bit younger then, but I probably supported it. And I can tell you straight to your face, I think that a lot of those interventions and we've gotten things wrong. But the idea that we had to take the refugees after was a different problem. We shouldn't have been doing that, and we shouldn't do that now. That's why I say now with Gaza, don't take any of the refugees.
No, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with that. But at the same time, it's the hypocrisy of how we will arc up about stuff going on here about the Muslims or whatever. Well, they would be pretty pissed if they had seen some of their family members get killed, the house get blown up, their country destroyed. Now, that doesn't justify, bringing it here, right? I just want to be clear about that. But we talk about our values in some self-righteous manner, and this is what annoys me, is that we're not perfect either. And we need to be, entirely... And it's from Sky. When I see News Corp getting on their soapbox about, it's just a hypocrisy, and it's on both sides, by the way. It's not just I'll say, well, I'm sort of slightly right of centre, but it annoys me that how we take the moral high ground.
But don't you think we have? Even saying that, don't you think that we in the West, as a free democratic country, with all our faults, do have the moral high ground? We do generally. There are sometimes bad faith actors who get in and do stuff that work against our principles. But the essence of what we stand for is good. We do have the moral high ground. We are fighting for freedom and democracy.
Well, in its pure state. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
it's corrupted by individuals. It's corrupted by individual organizations or individuals at times. But what we really stand for in Australia, and when I talk to you about Israel and Australia, the values are aligned, is those core values of freedom and democracy. That's what I care about, and that's what I would fight for. If one of those countries turned into a communist or an Islamo-fascist shithole, I would not back the country just because I'm from there. I would fight till my last breath to get back to the values of freedom and democracy. Has Australia stuffed up? Has Australia got things wrong? Absolutely. Has Israel got things wrong? Absolutely. We wouldn't be in the position we are today if Israel hadn't stuffed up in the past. But that doesn't mean that I'm now going to blame every little problem or imply that every problem that we're having, or even worse, imply that now that Jews are targets here, and they have been, you cannot argue that Jews have not been, that they've been targets.
No, and I don't, just to be clear. But can I just come back to, you talk about if we turn into some eco-fascism, whatever. We have been involved. So take the Middle East, right? So say the CIA overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran in 1953, right? Like, that was overthrown. We threw a democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014. I'll say we, the deep state, right? I call them the deep state Democrats, but to be fair, it was actually Eisenhower, even though I'm not sure Eisenhower was aware of it because it happened in the first year of his term, and I think it was Dulles that did it. But and then, it now turns out that we were funding Al Qaeda. I say we, the West.
The West
was funding Al Qaeda. I mean, that's why I reckon they locked Julian Assange up. It wasn't because he was exposing the war crimes in Iraq. It was that he was onto the whole fact that the CIA and the Pentagon were funding Al Qaeda in Syria to overturn Syria. Now, I'm not saying Assad was a good guy, but I'm not sure replacing Assad with Al Qaeda is any better.
And you're not going to get an argument from me on all of that, and a lot of that is also above my pay grade. I think that there's a lot of things that the intelligence community have done in this world, all intelligence community, that has been straight up evil. But there's also a lot of things that they've done that worked out well. So I agree with you. A lot of the things that you're mentioning here, and some of them, time will tell. What's happened in Syria now, time will tell. If the Al Qaeda guys, like, if I had to put my bet on it, I wouldn't trust Al Qaeda guys running Syria. But Assad wasn't a good guy either, so I don't know exactly. But back to the post and back to what we're talking about, because the first post was referring to, you're saying the Cairo Cafe is the implication. You're not really sure. It's when you say you're just asking, do you mean you're just, because I don't know if you know the internet today. I don't know how old you are. How am I allowed to ask? Is it rude to ask a man?
Yeah. I'm born 1970, so 54 going on 55.
54, 55. I don't know if you get that the internet, when you're saying I'm just asking this question, it needs to be asked, but really people read between the lines, which is what Sky News was getting at, is that people in the comments were supporting your notion, because nobody really takes it as just a question. People take it as, no, I think this is a Mossad thing, but I don't have to stick to it. Here, we've gone through it. You don't really have evidence of it being a Mossad thing. I've given you another example of it just being an Australian or about Australia, and you would agree that if they did that to an Australian, if an Australian went in there wrapped in an Aussie flag, you wouldn't have the same. Or would you? Would you have the same view?
Well, an Aussie would go about it differently. They'd go, well, have you got a problem? Like they'd be a lot more assertive.
How do you know? But if an Aussie went as a stunt and did it in the same way, wrapped in an Aussie flag, come on, we're a country of how many million Aussies, and we don't know how each one will play it out. No, I know I know proud Aussies that would wrap in an Australian flag, and I get it all the time, because there's always Aussies messaging me about different stunts they want to do on Australia Day and whether I'll come along and copy them, whether it's in Woolworths, confronting the idea of not selling Australian Aussie Day merchandise or whatever. So Aussies come up with similar stunts. So if an Aussie did it in that exact way, would you question whether it was security, intelligence interference, or foreign or domestic? Would you question it?
If they did it in Australia, no. But if they did it in another country, I would.
Yeah.
Because why would you need to, if you're Jewish, why would you, to me, you should be, if you go into a cafe and you'd be going, you're discriminating against me because I'm an Aussie. I wouldn't go into a cafe being on the defensive because I was,
But if they were
my
targeting you as
parents
an
raised me
no,
as a
but if they were
Catholic.
targeting Aussies, if they said the exact same thing, so the thing that they said is Zionist pigs stay away from this venue. If they said Aussie, that the same thing that they call Israelis, colonial Aussie occupiers,
Yeah,
stay pigs. The words they use is pigs to stay away from my venue. If then an Aussie wrapped in an Aussie flag went in there to test it, would
yeah.
you think it was an intelligence operation?
Uh, well,
Or would you just think
I'll
it's an
pro-
outraged Aussie?
probably an outraged Aussie, but that's only in Australia. So if
Sure, but
Australians were
if
living
you can
in another
recognize that
country,
an Aussie feels under attack in the moment that any shop in Australia tells him as an Aussie you're not welcome in my shop, can you not recognize how somebody who's a Zionist would feel the same about if a shop, even if it's in Australia, remember the shop owner, the guy's is Egyptian, he is targeting a different group of Australians.
and I guess you just say, so you're saying this, the owner's Egyptian and this other guy's Jewish, and that's the problem. So the Jewish guy should have went in there and said, "You're targeting me because I'm an Aussie." So
Sure.
so that's the point, right? Like
No,
I see. I,
no,
I
but
didn't even know you were
I'm an
Jewish.
Aussie Jew. Okay, the problem in this case is that the cafe was targeting Aussie Jews or Aussie Zionists. Um, not he wasn't targeting just Aussies. So in this case, it was somebody who
Yeah,
identifies as that. And all I'm trying to give you is the exact scenario in which it could happen and is most likely to happen, and how I personally know, because of my Mossad contacts, that that's how it
yeah.
happened. Anyways, we'll move on to your second post. You were, on your second post, you're reacting to the Sky News monologue from James McPherson, where he was mocking the idea that that him and his colleagues were working for Mossad because of their reporting on anti-Semitism.
Yeah, so that was an overegg for a start because I never said that he was or anyone on Sky News
You said News
was.
Corp. News Corp is part of it.
Well, News Corp, yeah, because News Corp, but that's not to say everyone within News Corp, every journalist, and that's what annoys me because I know News Corp was pushing the COVID jabs, but I know plenty of Sky journalists that didn't
Sure.
agree with it. Right, so he's gone and taken it upon himself. And the reason why I say News Corp is because Murdoch runs news, he does push narratives out through his papers. Right, so when I'm attacking News Corp, I'm attacking Murdoch and then those who go
Sure, but
along
you're
with
implying that there's
Murdoch.
a Mossad infiltration into News Corp. Is that
Yeah,
Murdoch is the Mossad infiltration, or you're saying
oh, I'm not saying Murdoch's the Mossad infiltration, but I would not be surprised. I mean, they're a worldwide media organisation. If Mossad had people inside News Corp, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. They could be. It wouldn't surprise me if they were in, excuse me, American
it's one
media,
thing not to
whatever.
surprise. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not arguing that. And it's
Yeah,
one thing not to be surprised by it. I wouldn't be
yeah,
surprised if ASIO was in American media. It's kind of
yeah, yeah. No,
that's
that's
their
true.
industry. Like it or
Yeah,
hate it, that's their industry, and they're designed to protect us. Sometimes they probably get us into more trouble, and other times they're probably very successful. I don't know, but my
yeah,
point here is James. James mocked the idea, which was, if you read the post, I think a fair person would read that implication as well. So my question would be then: Do you think Sky News should ignore or downplay what's been happening since October 7 on our streets across the country, mainly Melbourne and Sydney, let's say, just as the ABC has done? The ABC has ignored the only time the ABC has reported on these sorts of attacks, the different anti-Semitic attacks, and there's been a lot of them since October 7, as early as October 9, which no, I
yeah.
don't think you can blame anyone but the people responsible for them. But ABC, even that one on October 9, ABC ignored them while Sky News reported. Do you think that Sky News would be better off not reporting what's been happening and downplaying it just like ABC? Or is it good that they're reporting what's happening? It's just not nice what's happening.
Look, they can report it and they talk about it, but I've watched Sky News on some nights and it goes back to back to back to back to back. about anti-Semitism, that Gaza, the Palestine stuff. Now, as someone that's born and raised in Australia, no connection to any other country, when we got a cost of living crisis, an energy
Sure.
crisis, an immigration crisis, you're like, why Sky News? And the Australian's just as bad. Like I'll log on to the Australian in the morning, and first three articles will be about anti-Semitism or something like that, right? Well, that may be, and it may be a serious. I mean, it's a genuine issue, right? Not disputing that. But I can tell you, up here in Queensland, regional Australia, and most parts of Sydney, even, this is not the main issue of the day, right?
Sure.
And they are actually pouring the fuel on it in some respects, because you're starting talking about this stuff all the time. It gives people the idea to react to it, right? Rightly or wrongly, that's what happens. And the reaction by McPherson towards me, I don't know James that well, but he went on for 5 minutes. He made a quip about there's Hamas in my office. It's like, get
He was
real.
making
And
a
then it was
point.
like
He was making a
somehow,
point, but let's go back to. I don't want to argue about him. I want to talk about the reporting. My question is, should they downplay it? So, unfortunately, since October 7, there has been, and I was the first person. I'm the first person who would condemn the abuse of the term anti-Semitism. I didn't even like using it until recently because I feel like we're actually in a position. So, as tired as you are seeing it on Sky News and the
yeah,
Australian, trust me, I'm tired of feeling it. But
yeah.
and when you say that it doesn't affect, the country Australia or whatever, wherever you're saying it doesn't affect, well, what I'd argue to you is it doesn't affect them yet. I always tell people, first they come historically for the Saturday people, and then they come for the Sunday people. If you turn a blind eye now to majority of those that are turning against Jews, and I'm talking about from a lot of the immigrants that we brought in, there are enclaves that the hate is pure in their heart against Jews. And the ABC is ignoring it because it's an uncomfortable subject for the ABC, because platforms like the ABC that import and promote importing more of this culture, well, it doesn't really sit well when that's the culture that's got a blind hate for another part of the Australian community. And what will happen is when they're done with the Jews, when the Jews aren't fighting back anymore, and you keep bringing more of them in, that's why it is a warning to the rest of Australia. If you keep bringing more of those in, at the end of it, they're going to turn against the exact people you think it doesn't affect because of the cost of living issues and those other really important issues at the moment. I think we can do both. I think we need to talk about, if attacks are happening every day, as they have been, I think it is the media's role to report them. I think it's also their role to report the cost of living crisis and all the other important issues happening across the country. I don't blame Sky News and the Australian for reporting each and every one of the attacks, because you know what? Quite frankly, I don't trust the ABC in doing it. The ABC refused to do so until the stories got too big.
But Avi, there's women out there that get beat up every night. There's Australians out there that are homeless every night as well. And so, by all means report it, but then it's balanced reporting as well.
Sure.
And so the question is, when they do nothing but talk about this particular issue, which impacts people in Australia, I'm not saying it doesn't, and I'm not saying it's serious, but it impacts certain, and I don't disagree with you, by the way, on, we don't want to import this. And I've made that very clear, and I made it clear in that post. We just don't want to import these old ethnic rivalries, right? Because it's not, you come here, you got to be Australia first. And that's my view. And it's the same for the media. We need to focus on what's going on here, notwithstanding that there are, attacks. But it's about proportionality, and the response by James McPherson, to what my comment was, is if I don't push a pro-Islam point of view every day on my page. So for him to accuse me of having Hamas in my office,
I don't think he didn't accuse.
Total...
He was mocking. The way I read it was he was mocking the idea that just because you take a stand against it, it means you're pro-Israel. And he goes, well, just because you're standing against it, it makes you pro-Hamas. And then he says, I don't actually think you've got Hamas infiltrated into your office. It's just, you see how that.
And then he goes on to talk about the rallies last year, which, I have never mentioned in terms of promotion or anything like that. Other than, and I haven't referred to anything specific, I've said don't bring it here. I don't want to know about it.
Sure.
Like, we need to deal with our issues here in Australia.
And I agree with you. I don't think we should import any ancient or current conflicts into Australia. Yeah. But let me put it to you this way. We look at the rallies over the last, again, since October 7. You've had weekly rallies across the country, huge, anti-Israel, waving either Palestinian flags or Aboriginal flags, never an Australian flag, not one Australian flag ever in that time at any of those rallies. There's been terrorist flags until they banned them. And then on the other side, you've had a few times where the Jews were pushed too far. I think there's probably a handful of rallies, pro-Israel rallies from Jews that are full of Australian flags because they're proud of being Australian first. But no one in Australia wants to feel like they're scared to walk on the street because of who they are, and don't want to feel like they're not allowed to into a cafe because they happen to be the wrong kind of Australian. So I would argue to you that that one is protecting Australia, the other isn't, and that's why Sky News and Australian-loving broadcast, and I'm no defender of the mainstream media. Hell, it's why I exist, is because of how these people. Mostly it was COVID. In COVID, how they dropped the ball and how the mainstream media struggle with the truth too often. But I feel like this is the wrong fight to pick because they are taking a strong stand in defending proud Australians, in feeling safe in Australia, whilst at the same time pointing out we're importing people that hate this country as much as they hate the group they're protesting every week for the last 18 months.
Yeah, okay.
Let me ask you, do you really believe that it's Sky News causing the division, not actually just a divide in the community, and one that, I think is self-inflicted by what we've imported here? Because
to a degree, it's not all self-inflicted, but
Sorry?
To a degree, it's not all self-inflicted.
I think to a large degree. I think to a large degree, if you bring people to Australia who hate Australia, who are going to essentially hate Australia, then they're going to, and they happen to also hate Jews in Israel. Maybe who knows which order, in which order, but it is self-inflicted. But and then also, can't people say the same about you, especially in the current climate where you're implying that the only Jewish state is plotting to cause division in Australia, and that the politician that we don't know who's he sold out to, or he or she sold out to, so implying that again that must mean they're working for Israel without throwing any other names on there, and without providing any evidence.
It must mean, but I gave the reason why is that the coalition and I've said this before, because both major parties are quiet about this. It's clearly not something one. Well,
what if it's Ukraine? What if it's Ukraine? What if it's the US?
Yeah, I don't know why fair point.
Those are all examples, but that's why I'm showing to you when you say that they're causing division, that Sky News is causing division by doing that. I'd argue you're causing division by literally pointing out in the current climate where there is so much hate directed towards the Jews to pick on the one Jewish state when whatever you're saying could be applied to Ukraine, to the US, to the UK. Those are all countries that I would see the opposition would again not want to for the same reason.
So wait a minute, Avi. So the US don't offer politicians free trips to the USA, right? So Ukraine, could be Ukraine.
Sure, Ukraine.
Because they're very heavy-handed at the moment, going into Parliament, pushing their issues, rightly or wrongly. The British wouldn't do it because they wouldn't need to because they're already in the tent.
Fine. If the whole reason is about the free trips that Israel gives to show, and they do that, Israel and Palestinians also. By the way, Palestine does it as well. The difference is that you're arguing that the opposition wouldn't mind saying it if it was Palestinians. So Israel does it, but Ukraine,
or China, or a number of other countries.
Ukraine does it. China does it, but in this point, the best would be Ukraine, the best example, and it could be Ukraine.
Except this was about a decade ago, so I doubt it was Ukraine a decade ago.
There are a number of countries that it could be a decade ago. We've got to look at the time, where it's sensitive. At the moment, if it was right now, it could be Ukraine. But you've pointed the finger at specifically the one Jewish state. All I'm saying to you is you're saying Sky News is being divisive by reporting these stories. Aren't you being divisive by pointing at the one without evidence? Like, if you had evidence, I'm with you. If you had evidence, I'm with you. I think that if there was a security thing where an Australian and an Israeli, I don't think that that's okay. But you don't have evidence of it, and you're pointing in the current climate to the one group which is copying it all, and it's feeding, and you can see it's feeding because all the neo-Nazis, all the far leftists, all the Islamists online are all sharing your posts to give their ideology legitimacy, because they're saying, look, we have one brave senator who's speaking out and pointing the finger at the Jews. It's actually the Jews that are destroying Australia.
No, that's not right, Avi. I'm not pointing the fingers at the Jews.
No, the one Jewish state.
Mossad, because it's an intelligence agency.
Sure.
Right. So, and I might add, I've also quoted another Jew by the name of Albert Einstein in that.
I'm getting to that, but I'm saying in the current climate,
I bag out the deep state Democrats all the time. Sure. Doesn't mean to say in the deep state. It doesn't mean to say I hate Americans.
I agree with that, and I do the same about Australia. And I also I say you can criticize Israeli policy. I criticize Israeli policy, especially during COVID. I don't think that makes you anti-Semitic. But if you're pointing to the one Jewish state for this one issue without any evidence in the current climate, and you see that everybody supporting you on it are those three groups, mostly the Islamists and the white supremacists that just feeding into their narrative, then I'd say you're the one that's creating the divide. You're the one that's helping fuel the divisiveness, because it'd be a different story if you actually had evidence of that, any evidence of it, but you don't. It's just a theory in your head and just asking questions, and it's creating and fueling that narrative. Do you see the point that I'm coming at?
Well, okay. So, Avi, I posted one line about Mossad possibly being involved with a minor event in a Sydney cafe.
Sure.
Right. And I was actually surprised by the head of the ASIO's, his words, right? And that's what I posted.
Sure.
And I post 3 posts a day. So I had made one line post, and then James McPherson comes out and carries on as though, and have I got Hamas? I mean, the thing is, those guys, so I crop plenty of emails. Sunday morning, I'm open up my emails, and I'm getting all this stuff about being anti-Semitic and all this crap.
I'm not talking about James McPherson. I'm not here to defend.
There must have been a story out there. And then so I finally realised what it was. Someone's told me who it was. I said to these people, I said, well, where are you getting this from? And then I've seen James McPherson's 5-minute rant on Sky, yet again, throwaway lines like Hamas is in my office, and then he goes on.
I know.
And it was just like, okay, James, this is exactly what I'm on about. This is what Sky News has been doing for the last 12 to 18 months.
What are they doing?
Here's the world in Australia the last 6 years. Climate change, bushfires, panic, panic, panic. COVID, panic, panic, panic. Voice, division, racial division. And in the last 18 months, Palestine, Israel. Now, Palestine
but there are two
Israel,
separate things. Palestine, Israel is, I agree with you, is... like most Aussies, why do they care? It's a world away. And
exactly, they don't.
I'm with you on that. Okay, but when there's things happening on the streets and they're reporting it, then fine. And that's why I don't think we need to conflate the two. That's why when I look, and I'm not talking about James's monologue, because I'm not here to defend James's monologue. I'm here to question what you wrote in those 2 posts. And part of what you wrote in that post is you said when you were answering James, you go, if Sky News really wants to stop the division, why don't they investigate funding of Hamas? And you shared an article from the New York Times of all places as your source. So I'm saying, let's pretend that the New York Times article is fully true. It isn't, but let's pretend it is. How would investigating the funding of Hamas stop the division in Australia? It's just after what we've said, that I think that there are 2 separate issues here. You have the war, Israel and Hamas, and you have the attacks and all the growing, I hate the word, the Jew hatred, the anti-Semitism that we've seen since October. How would that stop? How would investigating the funding of Hamas stop the division here in Australia?
Well, I mean, we need to find out why Hamas did what they did. I mean,
But they're two different things. But we just said that.
No, they're not, because this has blown up since October the 7th. I mean, look, I'm sure it was always there under the surface at a much lower level, but still there, right? So I'm not denying it's not there, right?
Listen,
but
you could go to most mosques on a Friday. There are a lot of passages in there that are directed at Jews, and so it's always been there. It's come to the surface. That's what I said.
I'm sure it was there. It probably wasn't, but Sky has been on about it non-stop since October the 7th. Now, yet again, the entire Middle Eastern war on terror has been a complete and utter Truman Show over the last 20 years. The lies, the chemical weapons of mass destruction was a lie. We stayed in Afghanistan for another 10 years after bin Laden was killed, despite the fact they found him in Pakistan.
Yeah.
But I'm not arguing
all. I'm not arguing all
Syria,
of that.
it now turns out we're funny. Okay, so let's get more specific. So then the Comdex shorts, the commitment of traders on gold, had closed out to its lowest level in the month prior to October the 7th. We've got the whole story. There is I have a genuine issue here with how is it that the Israel Defense Force didn't see what was going to happen? I respect Mossad as an intelligence organization.
I am with you, and I think the majority of Israel is with you in wanting to know how October 7 was able to come to happen, right? Most of Israel, I've been to Israel a number of times since October 7. I served in Gaza. Kfar Aza, the one that they butchered all the soldiers, that was my base. So I'm telling you now that, those questions have to be answered. They do. And the fact is, because Israel is a robust democracy, at the end of all of this, it will be answered, and they're already starting to be.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm skeptical. Nothing against Israel, but I mean.
But but I'm saying to you, unlike in Australia, every Israeli is who's opinionated stands up for what they believe in, and most of the country wants the answers, but they know the answers don't matter if they don't survive the war. So they need to lock down, they need to make sure, they need to win this, and then they want to find out the truth of what happened and the failures. And it's failures. There are massive failures. In fact, like just this week, the reports have come out about some of the failures that were happening. But that's all going to come. The question I had for you is, how is investigating the funding of Hamas by Sky News, how's that going to stop the division here in Australia? It hasn't. They're two separate things.
Let me answer that, Avi. I'll tell you why. Because first of all, right, despite the fact that what's taking place is on another country, it is obvious until the peace settles down in another country. If these people who have arrived to this country, and you're obviously worked up about, you live here, you were born here, right?
I love Australia more than anything.
Yeah. So until such time as that stuff settles down, from the point of view of those people who are still looking at the other countries, this stuff isn't going to settle down, because while the war continues over there, there's still going to be, the Muslims and the Jews are still going to be fighting here. So that's the thing. And if Sky wants to keep talking about it, I mean, I've got no problems with them reporting about it, but all they ever do is report, the anti-Semitic attacks here or whatever. Why don't they actually start asking questions? Well, how did this happen? Not that it's really up to Sky Australia to be doing this.
Sure, but they did. But on one hand, you say you don't want. They're reporting too much about the conflict, which I agree with you. I think that I think that ABC's lost the plot.
What's that? Sorry.
I think ABC has lost the plot in their reporting about the war. They love it because it's it's perfect. It's got the brown victims, and they can paint one side as the white colonizer. It's a perfect story for the ABC, and it's like on 24/7. I agree with you. That's why so many people. That's what's fueling the division here. Is the reporting and making one side the big brutal colonizer, and the other side is the poor little thing. Sky News has far less reach than ABC News. I just don't see how investigating the funding of Hamas is going to stop the division here. I think
I think it will, because we need to stop. We need to stop Hamas. Period. Right? Because
that I agree with you on. So
Yeah.
so do you,
And this is not just Hamas. I said this in my maiden speech, and this was before the Israeli-Gaza war back in 2019. They need to go after the Milo Minderbender. Milo Minderbender was a warmonger in a book called Catch-22, right, about what was going on in the Middle East. And this is the thing: they will always talk about the front end where the puppets fighting each other like a Punch and Judy show, but no one ever wants to look at who's pulling the strings. And now, I mean, I won't pretend to be an expert on this or know what I'm talking about, so I'll throw this out here as another begs a question. But, money does seem to be coming from Qatar to Hamas in Gaza, regardless of whatever Israel may or may not know about it. So, but yet Qatar, I think, has got one of the biggest US military bases. The houses are really big. I'll stand corrected, or certainly an ally of the States. I think, if I'm
the Qatar is less so. You're talking about the Saudis and Qatar's like Qatar's a bit. Qatar hosts all the terrorists. I agree with you. I think we should cut ties with Qatar. Why are we supporting terrorists?
And so this is where we're coming back to. It's like this never gets discussed. Is who's funding these guys, and why aren't we going after the people doing the funding and cut their
I agree, but when we talk
off?
about the funding of these guys, so a big part of it's Iran, and when we have that conversation, people from those that are supporting your comments are like, oh, you just want to start a war with Iran. So wait, so you don't want to follow the money when the money goes to Iran or Qatar? I agree with you. That's where the money's coming from, is Iran and Qatar. So you do or you don't want to challenge that issue. It seems like people that are just asking the questions about this subject and wanting it to fall somehow in Israel's lap, when it falls in the wrong lap, when it falls in Iran and Qatar's lap, then suddenly it's like, oh, you just want us to start a war on your behalf. You want us to fight the rest of the Middle East, drop more bombs. I agree with you. The funding is important to end Hamas, and whether Sky News reports it or not, I don't think Sky News will have any kind of influence on what happens there. But I think that
and that's the thing. But that's the thing about a lot of the media stuff. I mean, yes, they have influence. No, they don't. But for me, I just, because I've been asking this question for 20 years, and it's like this. And the thing is, after COVID, I thought to myself, we haven't had the war on terror for a while. What's the bet we had a war on terror? And the next thing will happen. It's going to be a financial crash to bring Trump down, right? Like there's this recurring bit of racism, bit of financial crisis, now health crisis. Then we go back to the climate crisis. But no one ever looks deeper than just the superficial.
Well, I'm somebody that likes to think that I do look deeper than the superficial, and I think that two things can be true at once. I think you can actually investigate both. You can talk about the funding of Hamas, but you can also report on the daily attacks on Jews in Melbourne, or in Sydney, something that we can do something about here and now. And whether that's looking at our immigration policy or our policing or our law enforcement, like whatever it is. And I'm saying some of the answers they're coming up with, I'm against it. Anything that's any attack on free speech in the name of the Jewish community, I hate that. I think that's horrible. I think that's wrong. And I hate the fact that they're dragging my name into it as an Australian Jew. But pretending like it's not happening because you think that somehow investigating Hamas will stop the division, I think that's either, like, at best, it's delusional.
I didn't say it would stop, but I said we should be asking deeper questions as well.
You said if Sky News really wants to stop the division. I think your wording is if Sky News,
they've got to fill the airways between 5:30, 5 and 9, 10 o'clock at night, right? Yeah. But rather than just constantly. And this is the thing.
I hear what you're saying, but you did. But just to clarify, you did say, like, if Sky News really wants to stop the division, why don't they investigate the funding of Hamas? That's so.
True. And that would because by shining a spotlight on it, right, people will start asking, where is this money coming from?
Can they do both?
I guess, yeah.
That's I agree with you.
When you say both, you mean
report on what's happening,
calling it out. Yeah.
Report on what's happening here day by day, and track and run investigations on the funding of Hamas and see if Australia's involved at all. We found out that USAID was funding billions to them. So that's just come out. So I agree with you. But I think we should be doing all of it, and instead of throwing questions that imply that I actually think the real source of the problem is the Mossad. That's my.
I'm not backing down from the fact that I think Mossad is out there in the world.
I'm not
putting
denying
narratives
Mossad's back in the
media.
world. Look at what they did with
Not
the
like every other
beepers.
intelligence agency is.
Do you at least give them credit for their beeper operation?
Which one's that?
In Lebanon,
the beaker one.
In Lebanon.
Well, but okay. So now that's a really good. I'm glad you raised that actually. So these guys were good enough, or if that's the way you want to describe it. I mean,
sure.
Pretty,
yep.
For the kids that cropped it, I don't know if it was, but
the one child.
You could identify who was the Hezbollah targets, get the beeper in their pockets, and take.
No, they didn't have to identify them. They took over. And they basically sold them the beeper, and it's a 10-year operation. They sold them the beepers, I think, almost 10 years ago, and they handed it out.
Okay, so they could pull that operation off, but yet somehow they missed what Hamas was going to do on October 7th.
Sure. I know.
And then just recently, when they're handing back the prisoners hostages. Then suddenly Hamas rock up in these what look like brand new sort of starched uniforms with what look like guns from somewhere.
Yep.
So how is it that Hamas was somehow be able to keep their guns in Gaza? What do you mean? Israel's basically flattened all of Gaza.
Stop believing the fake news. Stop believing the fake news. Israel has.
Okay, right. Whatever. But if you're good, if Mossad's good enough to get target people Hezbollah via the beepers, why can't they get the weapons off Hamas in Gaza?
Because okay, so getting the weapons off Hamas in Gaza is they've got the whole world was stopping them from having an actual ground invasion. They've done a pretty good job at toppling most of Hamas leadership. I think you're right. It shows that there was a focus on the northern border with Lebanon because Hezbollah they always feared as a much stronger, greater threat to Israel than Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I think it was a massive intelligence failure. That's my personal belief looking at everything we know now. But like I said in the beginning, I believe that there has to be an open, transparent investigation into this. And I think that as good as it will ever get in Australia, it will be better in Israel than it ever would be here just because of how angry and upset and touched this war has affected every single Israeli. You got to remember it's such a small country.
But Avi, okay, so here's the thing. I actually think Mossad are very switched on. Yep. So we can't just say it was an intelligence failure.
But Mossad doesn't operate. Hold on, but Mossad doesn't operate in the Gaza Strip. Do you know that? So Mossad operates.
Oh come on, Avi, you can't.
Mossad operates. No, it's a shin bet. It's another. It's. I don't know what do we call it. So in Israel and the territories, you have the shin bet.
Yeah. Which is that like the FBI?
Like the FBI, and then Lebanon is the Mossad. Mossad's the one that has the Shin Bet's just as good. But it operates in the territories.
Okay, right. Fair enough. I didn't know
massive intelligence failure. There is I know my nephew was serving at the time. All his units were in the West Bank. They were concentrating their forces in the West Bank because they were having problems in the West Bank. They relied heavily, and this is a great point to as why not to trust in smart cities. They relied heavily on technology to protect the Gaza border, and then when shit hit the fan, there was just not enough military power there on the ground to compel it. It took a few days. Now, there's a lot deeper. There's a lot of things they missed. It's come out that that the actual plans were seen by intelligence, but they thought that they thought that they would have much more indicators closer to it actually ever happening. They just didn't believe it. All that will come out. I feel super confident that will come out just because I know enough about the situation and the population. My point is saying that they were successful in an amazing intelligence operation like the Bieber thing does not prove. So just because you're great at one thing in one instance doesn't mean you can't drop the ball on the other hand. You know what I mean?
No. But no, I don't. You're right. So I can't say for certainty that it wasn't an intelligence failure. but having also known the lies and everything, we know Operation Northwoods was real. We know that, so intelligence agencies have been caught, not saying it's been Mossad.
Yeah.
But these things, like, we need to get to the bottom of these things.
Sure.
And I'm not prejudging anything, but I'm not going to take the stand.
But it seems, but in these posts,
you know,
it seems like you are. That's all. That's my point here. So let me ask you. You made a point about you say to him that instead of actually researching the history of Mossad, McPherson proceeds to read the comments on my social media as though that makes me a bigot. There are plenty of vile comments on Sky News sites that don't get pulled, so he's showing his bias here, which is true. There are, and there are a lot of mine. But don't you see the difference between people posting vile responses to a news story compared to vile responses in support of the underlying point that you're making when you're just asking questions that Israel and by extension, the Jews are to blame? That's what essentially is happening there. Do you not see the difference in those comments?
So, hang on. What am I saying? Where am I saying the Jews are to blame?
No, you're not. You're not. You're not.
Right.
I'm not saying you are, but the fact is that you're asking these questions that are creating comments, and the comments are easy to see. They're all there, and they're supporting your point. They're just making the direct connection over and over and over again, because that's, remember, I told you, I don't know if you realize how the just asking questions thing works on the internet. It's where they're taking the implication from you, whether you consciously are doing it or by accident, they're taking it that you are blaming the Jews. And so those comments, so there's a big difference. That's the point here. There's a big difference between Sky News vile comments below a story and comments all in support of you pointing at the Jews. And I'm not saying you're pointing at the Jews. I'm saying, I know you're not, but you are.
Well, okay. I'm actually, so the initial post that I did last week about Thursday or whatever was directed at the media, stirring up trouble, right? And by connecting Mossad, I was connecting Mossad to the media, right? Now, if you go back and read my post, I have numerous cracks at the intelligence agencies. And it's mainly the CIA, and I've had cracks at our ASIO for not getting to the bottom of Edward Holmes, who was tied up with Fauci at the start of the pandemic and covering up the origins of coronavirus and stuff like that. I have criticised. I'm yet to do. I want to do a post for if I don't get back in on the MI6. How I've got issues with the way they carry on. So that was the initial post. The McPherson post, where he just had a 5-minute.
No, but it's also, but your first post is full of those comments too. Listen, when you talk about MI6, when you point the finger at ASIO, when you point the finger at CIA, your comments are not full of people going, the Jews. When you talk about specifically the Mossad, about things that you don't actually have evidence, you just believe, and I'm accepting what you're saying, that it's coming from, you're not coming from a malicious place where you actually believe the Jews are controlling the world, and that Israel is actually like the most corrupt thing. You're not. But the people reading...
No, I mean, I've hardly commented on this.
But can you see the difference in people commenting when you talk about something like this, such a divisive topic, which you agree, you recognize is divisive, because you're saying Sky News is being divisive by talking about. So when you take such a divisive topic and then you point at one side you are doing that exact thing, and the people that are attracted, the people that are full of hate, are then filling your comments in support of your position because they think you're one of them.
Yeah, and that's the way social media works, is that people will tend to gravitate towards the views that they agree with.
Sure.
Right?
Do you think Jews are controlling the world?
What's that, sorry?
Do you think the Jews are controlling the world?
I think, as I've said to you before, I think the intelligence...
So do you think it's like all the intelligence agencies are the problem?
I think they're a large part of the problem. I think the banking establishment is a part of the problem. And then I think there's other groups, and I don't know who they are, but there are powerful groups. Obviously, and I hate to use this word because it's overused, but obviously where you have concentrated wealth funds like BlackRock and those guys, because they control so much money.
I've confronted those guys myself.
Outcomes. So now, are there Jews on the boards of those companies? Yeah, there are, right?
I've confronted a lot of... Larry Fink is a Jew. I've confronted him. His bodyguards are pushing me over.
Yeah.
It would be the perfect. It would be the perfect Mossad situation.
When I have a crack at Mossad, right, it doesn't mean to say I have a crack at, because I know within Israel and then outside of Israel amongst the Jews themselves, they argue about the existence of Israel, right? So
there's barely argument over the existence of Israel. That's a very small minority of Jews that don't believe in the existence of Israel. Right. But just like Australia, I guess it's like Australia. There are people that have
a diverse range of opinions on
far left to far right.
I mean, there's secular Jews that don't really. What's that? Sorry.
It's a bit like Australia. You have a spectrum of the far left to the far right. But Israel's probably a bit more right wing generally, and Jews around the world are generally a bit more to the left. I think October 7 has changed things for a lot of Jews because they realise that their traditional allies have turned on them. But when you say that there are Jews that don't believe in the existence of Israel, that's a very tiny minority. You're talking about maybe 5% of Jews, but they're the same people that would also not believe in the existence of Australia. So I don't think we need to take them too seriously. The point is that the state of Israel exists, and like Australia, it's a modern democratic state. And I'm not saying we need to fund them. I'm just saying that if you're going to criticize their policy or something specific, and you're a senator, maybe also be mindful to the fact that because it is a divisive subject that I recognize as divisive, be careful with the words I use in it. If you don't mean that you blame them for all the world's problems, be careful in the way you frame stuff, because there are a lot of people today that are going to hijack your message about the intelligence community for their own personal thing, which they don't care about the intelligence community. They just care about the Jews.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I accept that. And my post was a slap down to Sky, because they'd been running that caravan issue, and then that was used as one of the reasons why we had to bring in the hate speech laws.
But again, I think that you need to run the caravan story. I also think you need to pull the government up on using that caravan as the excuse to urgently pass legislation that censors, quite frankly, people like me.
Avi, can I throw this in here before we wrap up? But and it's more not some. In this case, it's my former colleagues, and it really arcs me up, right? So my former colleagues were in charge under the Morrison government with the vaccines. A number of them, used to be so-called freedom fighters and all that, just shut up right throughout COVID, said nothing.
Yep.
And now suddenly they're at the forefront of speaking out about anti-Semitism and all that, right? Now, and I've gone them in the chamber. I've said, well, where were you 2 years ago when Dan Andrews was locking down the state? You said nothing, and now suddenly you're on this bandwagon. And the reason why they're doing it is because they think it's going to win them brownie points to become ministers. And that's what I hate. It's not actually Albanese being wedged here.
And Gerard, Senator, I agree with you. I hate that too.
Yeah, Gerard's fine. Yeah.
But I do both. I do both.
Yeah.
And I did.
I'm not criticising you, Avi. I'm on your show. I'm not.
I've enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed this conversation. I think it's important. And I think it's important for those people that are jumping on your bandwagon, thinking that they're reading into your post something that you're telling me you're not. Let's. I've only got a couple more things, so let's try get through it quickly. In that post where you to James, you try to educate him on Israeli false flags. You wrote Mossad / IDF have created plenty of false flags, the Lavon affair and the US Liberty, just to name a few, which is actually 2. That was probably an error.
Yeah, 2.
But whatever.
I mean, there's probably been others that we don't know.
But whatever. So
and that's not unique to Mossad. That's they're all doing it. Yeah.
Fine. When was the Lavon affair though?
On it in the mid-50s.
Yeah, 54, I think. And I think you meant USS Liberty, I'm assuming USS.
Oh yeah. I did one. Yeah, I was in a hurry. Yeah.
No, that's all right. When so that was in 67. That's a 6-day war.
68 or something.
And 67. And how was that a false flag though? That's not a false flag event. That unless.
Well, it was all. I mean, and you can tell me if my interpretation of this is wrong, but my understanding of it was that USS Liberty was attacked by Israeli airplanes.
It was attacked by Israel, but it was during the 6-day war. And it's and the official position by the US government is that the attack was a result of an error, and nothing more. Look, you're talking about in '67. It's not today.
Well, I mean, you talk to some of those guys.
I know. I
know.
I've seen a bunch of those guys talk about it. People that have lived through a traumatic experience in the inside compared to reviewing everything on the outside. I don't know why the US government would be the one protecting them. But even if they look, we don't have evidence that was a false flag event.
Well, it's an event that took place.
It's an event that took
place.
place.
And the argument is, is that they were going to blame it on the
but you called it. You say that Israel has created plenty of false flags. You gave one example from 1954. The 67 one is that's a very questionable one. No one accepts that. No one official accepts that as a false flag. But either way, you're talking about 54 is 75 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, do you have anything from the 21st century where Israel has done something that would support your claim about Israeli interference in Australia with regards to media infiltration or corrupting a politician? Because those are the two allegations that you made. Is there something besides for the two? One false.
Well, they're not allegations. So the second one, and I've asked. So I'm happy to be proven wrong here. ASIO just needs to come out and tell us who the politician is and who they sold us out.
I think they should. I'm with you.
Yeah, So that's a genuine question right now. Would it be Israel? I don't know the answer, but I would put Israel definitely in my top 5 potential countries as being one of them that they
sure, but you didn't. But you didn't list. You didn't list 5. You didn't list 5, and that's what I'm getting back to. In the current climate, you listed 1. It fed this narrative. You threw.
But that's the first. I probably did 4 or 5 posts on that one, and I've never mentioned Israel once or Mossad. Right? Yep. I just threw that in there because last week was estimates again.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, well, maybe as I was doing the post, maybe it is Israel because you can't criticise Israel. Right, so and that's
what do you mean you can't criticise Israel?
Well, my stab at Mossad being involved in the media here, and now everyone's calling me anti-Semite.
Yeah, but I guess like through the conversation that we've just had, do you understand why people think in the context of everything that's happened and the idea that it is a super.
But Avi, can you understand that if you can't criticise?
No, I think you should be able to criticise Israel. I think you should.
Yeah, because this is the problem.
I think if you're going to point a finger, at a potential theory in the current climate, a potential theory, firstly about infiltration into media. Well, firstly, that one I would. You'd want some sort of evidence instead of like a weird story of going into a cafe, which I can show you is pretty much.
And that's why I use terms like beg to question and.
I know, but that's what I was telling you is the asking questions. But and then if you're going to say a politician has been corrupted, but you think it could be one of 5 countries, so I would say it could be Israel, it could be this. Like list the 5 that you think that it could be, but when you point the finger at one and your comments then is full of people and all the.
I think I did initially point it at China, and then I backed off because I thought it probably actually isn't China. Because if it was China, the major party, certainly the coalition would have been jumping up and down about it, making a big hoo ha. So then I thought it's probably not China because it wouldn't suit the coalition to. And so, to be fair, I think I did point it at China.
Look, the problem is in a tweet, in a post, nobody gets to see your thought process on it, and all we see is what you wrote, and that's what I'm going off. And what you wrote,
but Avi, it's the reaction to it, right? So,
the reaction is.
If you read my post, I jab the bloody intelligence agencies all the time.
Yeah,
right?
I know that.
And okay, this time it was Mossad.
Yep.
And everyone's like, I get a 5-minute bloody rant from McPherson and Sky. Oh, yeah. And here's the thing: they caused this thing initially. Right. I mean, did they come out and give a 5-minute apology on why they shouldn't be stirring up? Because what you're saying about me, you could easily say about Sky.
Like what? About what? They should give an apology about stirring up what?
Well, about not Sky, sorry, News Corp and the Daily Telegraph for going in there and trying to film a particular event.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but we went through that, and whilst I think it was dumb, there's still a context there where it is sort of newsworthy. So it's.
Well, it wasn't newsworthy because it was a completely contrived event.
But it wasn't contrived. But it wasn't contrived in the fact that the owner wrote something. So they weren't They weren't just rocking up.
So then it was provocative to go in there knowing that.
I think it was silly. And I think it was silly. We're going back and I think it was silly, but it wasn't just like I'm pointing a finger at a random person and making it. It was based on something, and they did it. Listen, Einstein's letter. What I don't understand, because in the post it kind of jumps around. You put a lot in that post. What did Einstein's letter to the New York Times about a party before the modern state of Israel was even declared? What did that have to do with anything?
Because it's got to do with the fact that you can disagree with a political party and not hate the country. So
there was no country, but there was no country
Democrats.
there was a party in the state of Palestine, which was like the British mandate at the time, I think it was. So
but then Ergun, and then turned into freedom came out of Ergun. Ergun, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Irgun. It turned in because obviously the people that were fighting for independence at the time then turned into the modern state of Israel. But Einstein...
And Einstein clearly didn't have a high opinion of them.
No, but Einstein is also... He was a socialist who opposes capitalism. So should we take him seriously on that? Then
well, I didn't know that, but he was a very good scientist. I have to say.
But there's a lot of great scientists that are idiots when it comes to politics.
And he wasn't the only Jew that wrote that letter. I think there were 12 or 15 co-authors.
So also, you got to remember, like Jews in 47 or 48, whatever when that was. To Jews now is very different. Like Jews didn't have a modern state for thousands of years. They weren't in Israel. So Jews were probably scared of it. I don't know. I can't get into the mind of a Jew in America in 1948, but things are very different 75 years later.
Yeah.
And I just won't take the word of like a socialist anti-capitalist, take him seriously on whether the modern state of Israel should be born.
He's probably one of the greatest Jews that ever lived, Avi. You can't.
He's a great scientist, fine, but are you going to take his position on socialism seriously?
Well, I haven't read his. I'd have to read it. I don't know what.
So you would consider it. You think Einstein might convince you that capitalism is not the way to go?
Probably not, but I'd have to see how he wrote it. I mean, I'm a capitalist. I don't believe in free markets. You'll have to come to my stump speech to understand the difference between those two. But I know. I think corporations are socialists, right? They operate on limited liability. So I need to read.
If you're an anti-socialist, then Einstein in whatever it was in the 40s, whatever he said about Israel is if you're going to ignore his philosophy when it comes to socialism and capitalism, then I dare say you don't need to take him too seriously just because he was a Jew in America before the modern state of Israel was created. I just feel like it
so when was the modern state of Israel created?
48.
What
48.
year exactly?
48. I think his letter was...
Wasn't that the year he wrote it?
I think his letter was that year or the year before. But it doesn't matter.
Right.
Even if it came out after that, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. You're talking about a brand new state, which was a hot subject after the Holocaust.
It is relevant because I remember when Yitzhak Rabin was shot, right?
Sure.
I mean, I was living in London at the time, came home from a nightclub, and he'd been shot that morning. That was a real disappointment because him and Yasser Arafat with PLO had nearly signed a peace deal that was going to work. Clinton, and he didn't do much. But he got very close to signing that, and that was sabotaged, I think, by
an extremist.
A right wing, an extremist, right? But it's relevant because it's gone backwards since 1995, in my view.
What's gone backwards?
I mean, because even though I'm saying I'm an Aussie first, I spent 7 years overseas. I went to 85 countries. I do enjoy geopolitics, right, and watching how these countries I love the world we live in, right? So yes, Australia first, but also call myself a humanitarian and a human being. So it's real, and I don't like the way Netanyahu seems to be very heavy-handed in all this stuff. He's not the guy that's going to bring peace to Israel and Gaza. And we need to do that. I mean, look, and I've said this.
Who will? A left-wing government?
Well, I don't know. Yeah. But I don't think the current approach is working. And I mean, that's obviously, and good luck to whoever can bring peace.
Sure.
And yet again, another question, like, I mean, we're going out of Australian politics now here to the thing, but why
which goes totally off subject.
But Egypt. Sorry? Why can't Gaza become a part of Egypt and West Bank become a part of Jordan?
I'm with you on both those things. So that's a solution that, like,
Yeah.
West Bank's probably a lot more complicated because there are certain areas of the West Bank that are probably the most important in Jewish. I don't know if you're a religious person, but the whole when you talk about
The Dome of the Rock and
no,
places
Dome
like
of the Rock
that.
in Jerusalem, but
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
important places to Jews are in, according to Jewish history, is actually in the West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria according to Jews, but it's in those areas. So it's a bit more common. Gaza, I totally agree with you. Why isn't it Egypt? You know why it's not Egypt? Because Egypt doesn't want them, because they're 70% Hamas supporters and the other 30% are between Islamic Jihad and other mostly terrorist organizations. So
Okay, Avi, but here's the thing. I mean, if we keep them locked up in that little zone,
I don't think they should be locked up in that
like,
thing. I don't think they should be locked up in that thing.
Yeah. I mean, and so it's easy, and I mean, I'm not condoning this or anything like that, but we've got to sort that. I mean, it's not us personally. But,
it's not Australia.
I mean? This problem's got to get sorted out. Someone's got to bite the bullet and say,
I agree with you, and I hope that Trump is going to get it done, whichever way he gets it done. I agree with you, but none of that has anything to do with the division in Australia. Trust me, no matter which way that goes, the division's still here. We bought it here, and we need to deal with it. And it's not Sky News' fault that the division is here. It's the government who brought it here, and we need to.
Yes, look, and as I've said, I agree with you on that. But I'll still stick to my initial criticism of Sky. I will still
forget
say
Sky.
that
I don't even care about Sky.
In Sky.
I don't care about Sky News. I don't work for Sky News. I work for Rebel News.
I know you do. Yeah.
Listen, just before you go,
I think it might be Rowan Dean. Maybe he works for Mossad.
Rowan, I reckon Rowan is.
If he watches this, he'll crack it.
I reckon Rowan Dean is Mossad for sure. Rowan Dean is Mossad for sure. I sign his paychecks.
Who's that? Rowan.
I sign his paychecks for the Mossad.
Sure. Yeah.
Listen, you ended your post by saying the only winners out of this is the establishment. News Corp has always been their lapdog. COVID was the perfect example of that. People First will continue to call out the lies, dog whistle, and corruption in the major political parties and media. We believe in peace, prosperity, not war and terror. Now, I just got 4 questions on that before I let you go.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your time. How is reporting on attacks targeting Jews helping the establishment?
Oh, well, that was just a general comment.
So it's not necessarily that's not about that whole. It's just a
no, that's just having to dig at the establishment.
Just general. All right, mate. You might need to send us instructions in how to break down your posts because.
Well, if you read my post, you'll get a recurring theme of why, and it's why.
Well, I think most of the comments. I don't think most of the comments get it.
So if you follow me, and I've said this, like I don't trust big organisations, right? Doesn't matter whether it's big government or big corporations. Yep. They all push their agendas, and their hammers looking for nails. And I've said that. I mean, I know because this is the first time we've had a conversation. If you knew where I've been coming from and you read my posts the last 5 years, you know that I have a very healthy distrust of authority. And I know a lot of the time, and that the reason why I jumped on that Egyptian one, and notwithstanding I didn't realise what those guys had said initially, that was just like these guys, they're always looking for a story.
I get that. If
they haven't got one, they'll make it up and blow it up.
Yep. Yeah. I get that. I get that. But in the now that you know the context, does it change it a little bit for you?
Yeah, but I mean that was just a general like, it's just yet again these guys are, and I mean the and this wasn't really related to that line, but I'll tie it in anyway. Like what we've seen in the last 18 months, first 18 months of this term, the Voice was driving division.
Yeah.
And now we've got the coalition are playing on this, stoking fear and dog whistling. Now, I don't agree with Albanese on much, and he probably hasn't handled this the best. It was more the heat, but at one stage there, the coalition was getting stuck in Albanese because he didn't know what was going on with the caravans, the bombs in the caravan. And they were making a real story that somehow Albanese was bumbling about that. And as I've said, I'm not a big fan of Albanese, but it's like, well, it's a police investigation. He would have been briefed enough to be briefed enough, but he wasn't the guy that put them there. It's like the Chinese warships last week. They were in international waters, and the coalition are trying to say his reaction to it's bad and all that. And it's like, Well, you know, you guys had 9 years in power and didn't bloody build up our navy either, and it's just this
Sure,
constant.
but having
And the coalition and Sky jump on the back of this. So actually, I haven't said this today, and I should. Sky are jumping on the back. They do use this as a form of dog whistling to push the coalition's narrative against Albanese. Right now, regardless of some of it is true, I'll accept, like is valid, but it's sort of like, well, you know, he didn't cause this problem. You know, it was the coalition in power 20 years ago that dropped the bomb, you know, decided going into the Iraq war. I mean, mind you, our contribution wasn't significant, but it's don't kid yourself when the coalition are jumping up and down about anti-Semitism and really mean it. They're using it to basically incite you know, fear mongering and rally, and a lot of Jews now are going to vote for the coalition, right? They're doing it to win votes,
but the Jews don't sway anything. They're such a minority in the country that their votes don't mean very.
Well, that may be true, but then you'll get the Judeo-Christian soldiers as well, right? Now I know when I withheld my vote from the coalition over the vaccine injuries. I'm just going to try and fix this camera up a little bit. I had people tell me, "Don't worry about the deaths, don't worry about the injuries. We've got to get re-elected." And I was filthy, and I'm still filthy on them. And I guess that's my point too. Like Sky and the coalition, don't kid yourself that they're friends of the Jews either. They're jumping on this.
You want to know one thing Jews have
narrative.
learnt historically is learn to defend yourself, because at the end of the day, no one's coming to defend you, and that's why the state of Israel is so important to Jews, even here in Australia. Because at the end of the day, that's our backup plan. If Australia turns against us, and your comments, the comments on your post is a great example of many Australians that are quite concerning to me, because if they got the chance, I would be their target number one, no matter how much I love Australia.
Yeah.
Let me. So there was 3 more points on your closing in that comment. Look, I'm saying again, I'm not defending the media. It's pretty much why I exist, especially during COVID. But surely we can agree that Sky News is the best of a bad lot.
I struggle with them. I've been.
If you had to select,
there's some good commentators on there. So you know, Rowan's one of them.
Best of a bad lot. Best of a bad lot. Even
I love that. He's going to flip it. You know, Corey was great. But then, you know, like I've had Peter Credlin come out and completely lie about my position on voter ID. You know, Paul Murray dropped me like a hot scone.
But what makes a good media organisation is the freedom for them to have a different approach to the different things. When I'm talking
here's the thing. So I've had interviewers tell me before I've gone on that they've had to change the topic because the producers wouldn't let them.
I know.
Say what they really wanted to say. So they're heavily editorialized as well.
I've had those same issues. I'm not saying they're the best. I'm saying they're the best of a bad lot. You compare that to the ABC or to Guardian or to the Sydney Morning Herald.
They're all left wing. Look, the AFR I've always found is close to the middle. Australian Financial Review, that's print. 9 more towards the middle. Channel 7. Sky is still very biased. I mean, I'm right of centre, so I tend to agree with them. But
that's what I mean by best of a bad lot.
Yeah, I get bored listening. But like, I mean,
you're really struggling to give them any credit, are you?
Oh, like, I'm absolutely dirty on them because they are so biased towards coalition. And don't get me wrong, the ABC.
I'm biased to the coalition. You don't have to pretend to be. If I had to pick who I want to govern our country coming forward, it's definitely not Albanese. So
no, that's true. But you've still got to criticise the coalition.
I do. I think that the problem with the coalition.
I'm not saying this to you personally, and they are very reluctant to do that.
Sure.
And I actually get bored being in the echo chamber. I mean, I wish the ABC and these guys would interview me because I'd love the tussle. I mean, that's why I get on well with Murray Watt in terms of the chamber, because he actually goes me, and we have great tussles. Whereas listening to some of Michael, they just bore me because it's like, and except this. They're saying it because they think they don't mean it. They're saying it because they think they're going to get promoted because of it, and that's what I hate. They're fake.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that some of those, I know, and maybe because I know some of these Sky Media guys that, and I know they've been editorialised and they've allowed themselves to be editorialised, that it's hard. Like everyone knows the ABC's left. So outside of politics, everyone knows the ABC's left wing. And I mean, I went them last week because they won't interview me on the 7:30 report, right? So I haven't put this up on my page yet, but the day Fatima Payman announced her own party, she got a gig on the 7:30 report
Of
that
course.
night. So and I've been trying to get on the 7:30 report. I wrote them say, well, look, I've got a new party too, and I've actually got policies, right? So I had to go at them last week, and then they had to go at me for saying, "Oh, well, we're not here to promote your party." And I'm like, "Well, you seem to want to promote every other teal and that and whatnot."
Maybe is that why you pointed the finger at the Mossad? You were hoping that because Senator Payman's hate for the Jewish state, you thought, oh, maybe that's my way in on 7:30 on ABC.
No, no. I do have a beef. I've got to admit, I have a beef with intelligence agencies, and ironically enough, that's like because when I got down there, all Malcolm does is criticise the WEF, right? And so many of my followers criticise the WEF, and like I did a post yesterday on fixing monetary policy, withholding tax, and stuff like that, and how we got to fix up the economic side of things. And the first comment in was like, "Oh, we got to get out of the UN," and I'm like, and I replied and I said, "Look, we got to sort out our own bureaucracy first, right?" So it's interesting because a lot of my people, they blame the WEF and UN for everything, and and look, some of it's legitimate. Don't get me wrong, but my view of the WEF is it's a think tank that just happens to hold a conference in Switzerland in January, and a lot of people want to go there for skiing, to go skiing, right? And sure, they have an influence, like Sky News has an influence, but they're not the ones pulling the strings. As I said, as you said before, I'm a big believer it's the intelligence agencies, but look, I mean, I guess my point is, very few people actually say and feel what they really think. I mean, there's Alex Antic, Matt Canavan. They're my two closest colleagues in Parliament. I'll back those two guys to the hilt. Matt's a legend. Like he backs people even when he doesn't agree with them. But honestly, just about the rest of them, they just say whatever they think they've got to say, and it's a real disappointment. It's a real letdown for not so much democracy because they're democratic elected, but for good governance, whereby people are going to fight for the values that really and fight, are prepared to get themselves burned in order to see the right thing done.
I hear what you're saying. Last 2 points that you had on in your closing. People First will continue to call out the lies, dog whistling, and corruption in major political parties in the media. What lies is your party calling out here? And to be honest, can't people say that you're actually the one that's dog whistling when it comes to these two specific posts?
No, I wasn't dog whistling at all. I was calling out Sky News, who'd been taking a self-righteous
No, dog whistling when you say the Mossad. When you're saying the Mossad, I don't know if you, after this conversation, I don't think, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that it wasn't intentionally dog whistling, but it certainly was dog whistling, because if you look at the comments again in your one, and I know you didn't like when Sky brought that up, but the way that the comments have it was a dog whistle. You go, oh my God, guys, Mossad, and that dog whistle, which I've always hated that term, but I found it funny that you use it. It brought all the Jew haters to your comments, and I don't know if they're really your supporters. I imagine many aren't. I imagine
a lot of them probably. Some of them wouldn't
white
be.
supremacists. I see that you were trending in the white supremacist group, so they're getting behind you, at least within the comments. So the idea of a dog whistle, well, that was a dog whistle. So what lies are you calling the parties on? And are you going to, going forward, think, I guess, more carefully? Because if what you're telling me is true, which I accept, then you didn't intentionally mean for what you've done to be that dog whistle, but you have twice on those two posts ended up dog whistling. Are you going to be the one to stop?
So I wasn't dog whistling. What I was doing there was sending a signal that if there's intelligence agencies from other countries operating inside this country in the media, and I'll be specific, Mossad, okay, I'm going to, because this is the sort of stuff they do. They generate.
But isn't that a dog whistle? Isn't that a dog whistle standing up?
No, that's not a dog whistle. That's calling out calling out
saying if there is a Mossad infiltration into our media, I'm going to call them out. Telling that to an audience is saying to people, hey guys, this is how the rest of the world, this is why this is the definition of a dog whistle, is when you say that, and you're telling me, I don't have evidence of it, but it could be true. So if you're telling the world, if I find that there's Mossad involved in the media, I'm going to call it out. That is a dog whistle because you're saying to the Jew haters, guys, if there's a Mossad thing, if the Jews are controlled, this is the way they read it. And that's the definition of a dog whistle. I don't know what you mean by dog whistle.
Hang on, Avi. So the day before and on numerous other posts, I've called out the CIA. It doesn't mean to say I hate the American people.
Sure,
right.
We've gone through this. We've gone through this before because when you do it like that, so in those terms, yes, it doesn't because it doesn't have that effect because it isn't the divisive subject. Here, you're taking a hot, divisive subject which has spilled onto our streets, and you recognize that, and you go, hey guys, I'm going to see if that group that you guys are super suspicious of already.
So that argument equally applies every time Sky starts going on about Muslims. I mean, their page is full of vile Muslim hate, right? And they don't remove, well, maybe they do remove the comments, but like me, they probably can't remove them all because, you'd be doing it all day, every day. And I mean, you can have keywords to remove, right? So, but that's my point is that, okay, we've got a problem here, but them constantly, every night, Sky After Dark, talking about it just inflames it as well. So
you think that Sky,
and that's why I arced up with that Egyptian cafe because they effectively, had that gone pear shaped and that lady responded, that then would have become, could have been easily blown up, and that was right on the back of that caravan event whereby I think they're still investigating.
Sure, we've prosecuted that a few times. I agree with you that it was foolish, although with the context of what happened, I don't think the fact that you didn't know what the cafe was saying online was already an indication that it wasn't getting any press. So you do agree, though. So you're saying Sky is dog whistling by reporting on anti-Semitism because people are hating on...
No. Reporting on it's one thing, but when they go on and on and on and on and on about it, which they have for the last 18 months, and
what do you think we could do to fix the other things? What do you think that they can do, or we as a population can do to stop what we're seeing happening around the country? We can't control the war in the Middle East. What can we do in Australia? We're the media organisation, so what can Sky News do in Australia? And what can the government, do to stop what is clearly a problem?
Well, I think we've got to tone the rhetoric down. I think it just needs, and notwithstanding that there are bad events that happen, maybe we should reserve judgment until we know the full facts. So the caravan's a good one.
You want to reserve judgment? You want to reserve judgment, but then you'll point your finger at the Mossad without having the evidence.
And that's because, but the reason why I did that was because there was an event staged, an attempted staged event. Right, so
the caravan.
That's why I did it.
The caravan.
It wasn't as what's that? Sorry,
you're talking about the caravan.
No, the cafe.
Oh, the cafe.
We don't know what the caravan is, but Sky. So my comment was directed towards the Egyptian cafe with Mossad. The Sky one. Sky did though go off tap about the caravan, and they went off tap. Them and the coalition went off tap at Albanese about it, as though he would know that there would been these explosives and why they were there, and what exactly was he meant to tell the public? They'd been there for 2 decades. They didn't have detonators.
But the car was illegal. I don't know. I haven't got the full details of it, but I thought that it was an illegally parked thing. They had the guys already in custody for something else. They seem to think that they're involved in something where they're being paid by a third, and actually foreign actors is what I think they were saying. But I guess...
The Murdoch media and the coalition did milk that. They did milk that.
Sure.
And that's where they should have just calmed the farm and wait until, they knew what the story was.
Sure, but to clarify, you got no worries with them every day telling the stories that are happening when it comes to anti-Semitism, and, the fact that is going to fuel division in the community, I guess, is that what gets to guide the press? Like, you can't stop telling stories because Um,
No, that's right. But as I just gave two examples there, one was with the caravan, they blew it up,
yep.
like blew the story up, that is.
Well,
And
we don't know.
then
We don't know what it is.
and that
We don't
was
know what it
used to
is.
justify the hate speech stuff as well.
I agree. I
And
said that.
then
Yeah, but we don't know the caravan. We don't know
and
the
then the
caravan
cafe
stuff.
was a staged event.
The caravan stuff is pretty scary. A caravan full of explosives is like a pretty big story.
Oh, well, apparently they've been there two decades, and apparently this stuff is used in mines and stuff as well. So, look, I don't know enough to know, what went on.
I think it's a pretty like. Don't you want to get to the bottom of that? Like, don't you think?
Yeah, I do want to get to the bottom of it. And what I really want to get to the bottom of is why there was a note and what was in this note.
Sure,
Because apparently it was the note that suddenly, that there seemed to be an implication. I'll stand to be corrected on this. That somehow that may have had anti-Semitic.
Well, they were saying that there was a note of a note. I think they're calling it a note, but it apparently it just had the locations into which they were meant to be going to. It seems weird. I agree with you, but no one's going to get to the bottom of it if the media isn't honed in on it. Like, it's just
no. The police can get to the bottom of it, like the police.
But they're not going to bother.
I mean, I'll say they can, but until we know, like the police can get to the bottom of it.
I know, but let me tell you a little secret. The police keep avoiding certain groups of extremists because they're scared of exactly what you're saying. They're like, if it ends up... So why is it when it's white supremacists, they manage to lock them up within 24 hours, even before they seem to commit an offense? It seems like they're locking them up and they're finding ways to jail them. But then when it turns out to be some Middle Eastern connection, or it's for months we've got some of the biggest crimes with the biggest law enforcement agencies onto them, and they still don't have the synagogue in Melbourne. How do they not have somebody locked up for that yet?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
And so what I'm saying to you is, when there isn't enough media, when it's not politically correct, and when it's going to cause from the police perspective, because all the police care about is social cohesion, even if it means we keep the public in the dark.
Look, Avi, there's plenty of examples of that, and I agree with you there. I don't know with the caravan, the bombs in the caravan, if that was a
all I'm saying is that I think every single story, it just needs to be told, and needs to be told straight, no matter who the outcome is going to offend anyone.
Avi, the Sky News and Coalition were using that against Albanese, and there's plenty of things
ABC and the Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald. It balances their nonsense out that is propping up Albanese.
That's fair enough, and it would be, but we need to call it as we see it as well, and then
do you know what? Sky News
used for the hate speech stuff.
Sky News is a private company. Like, News Corp is a private company. If they piss off their viewers, they're going to lose their viewers. I don't care. I have more of a problem with the ABC, who I'm paying.
Who aren't balanced.
Who are not balanced at all. Okay, final. Your final message is, we believe in peace and prosperity, not war and terror. I like that. That sounds great. In fact, if you look at Trump's peace through strength, I actually wholly agree with that. But how do you achieve peace? One, if you're not going to do it through strength, and if you don't believe at all in our intelligence agencies, I don't know how you're going to achieve peace. So how will you guys achieve peace if you don't believe in the intelligence agencies at all, and you're willing to, I guess, ignore or play down some of the things that are happening day by day here in Australia at the moment? How would you achieve that?
Well, intelligence agency. I didn't say I didn't believe in intelligence agency. I believe that they're not acting in our best interest. They have been for the last 2 decades. War in Iraq, Afghanistan, a war they're staying there. The funding of Al Qaeda in Syria, to name a few. These are more to do with the US than Australia, but we seem to support it. The overthrow of a democratically elected government in Ukraine, right? These are all deep state intelligence-backed operations. Gabby Colsard.
So how would you achieve peace? How would you achieve peace for Australia?
Well, first and foremost, we need to have a prosperous country, right? Because without a prosperous country, we can't afford to have a decent defence system. But as I said in my maiden speech, it needs to be led by sound diplomacy and strength of position. And that's always, and especially with a country like Australia, an isolated country in the South Pacific, we need to use sound diplomacy. And that means that sometimes we now have to say to some of these other wars, like, Albanese today has come out and said we're going to put peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. I'm like, no, we've got enough problems here. We just had the Chinese Navy sail around our country, technically in international waters, but, we need to sort out our own country first. And I think this is the point, that I was probably having to go at Sky and all that. Like, a lot of Australians can we just deal with our own issues? We've got very serious issues. And, whether it was climate change, COVID, the voice, or the latest, Palestine, Israel issue, let's focus on the stuff here. Let's stick of the fear mongering and all of the stuff that it's easy to be. There's a lot of rhetoric used and a lot of hyperbole and all of that stuff. Can we just get proper solutions and implement solutions? And that's what people are looking for.
So what solutions would it come to achieve peace here? So, will we have allies? Like, I get what you're saying, but of course the world.
Well, you're talking civil peace is within the country as opposed to sort of going on the big picture.
You say we believe in peace and prosperity, not war and terror. So I guess what do you mean by do you mean civil peace here and international?
Yeah, civil peace. So basically, we're all Australian, number one. Leave your baggage behind. I mean, as I said, I follow this stuff with an interest. I try not to talk about it. I've been dragged into this recently. I pretty much stayed away from it until the last week or so. It was really the bombs in the caravan where I first started posting about it. Leave it all behind. Yeah, and treat people. As one of my social media headlines used to be, judge the individual, not the identity. And that's what we've got to do. I mean, we are all part of the human race, one race, and
sure. So how would you guys, when you believe in it, how will you achieve it when we've got people here that don't love Australia, that hate everything we stand for?
Well, look, I mean, there is a certain so let's hone in on the Muslim community here, which I'm not saying
I'm saying that there's certainly an element there. There's also an element in the far right. There's also an element in the far left.
And they're here now. And look, what's happened. I think it was a big mistake. But anyway, we've now had way too much immigration. We need to slow the immigration rate right back to zero. And these people need to assimilate. Now, will the first generation of arrivals assimilate perfectly? No, they won't. And I mean, that's not anything new. I mean, there's always
many of the extremists are actually the kids and grandkids of immigrants these days.
Well, now that's the real problem, right? So that is the real problem, and that is because for a number of reasons, we've had the war and terror, whatever. It's been too high. The immigration's been too high, and then when it's too high, they can, if you're coming in at a much slower rate, it's harder to find a community of like-minded people because there's not many of you, right? And if you're going slower, then children of the first generation of the immigrants will, as they go to school and that, like if it's a slower rate as well, it's less likely to set up your own schools, Islamic schools or whatever. So therefore, you send your kids to a public school, they'll end up, meeting Aussies, mucking around with Aussies. And look, I know plenty of Muslims who are Okkarized now, you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't even know they're Muslims. They're not that Muslim. I mean, it's you got to judge it on.
But there is obviously a problem in the extreme part of that community.
And so that's what we want. We want people when they come here to assimilate. And at the same time, I mean, it's when Sky News and the ABC or whatever are constantly talking about Israel and Palestine instead of Australians, and just referring to people as Australians. And we don't and say it openly. Look, we don't want to hear your problems. Then it's sort of like we got to focus on the future of Australia, and that's what we're worried about.
All right.
I mean, I can give you the prosperity part. I can talk for about 3 hours on.
Yeah, look, I'm more interested in hearing the peace.
I'm pretty sure that won't.
Because at the end of the day, I feel like something dramatic has to change to protect Australia. Like I said early on in this conversation, I think the targeting of Jews is just the first step, and history tells us that. And I think that we do have a major problem in Australia. I think immigration needs to stop. I think we need to fix what we have now. We need to go in and, that school that's rallying outside,
Yeah.
screaming jihadi slogans.
Yeah, and we don't want Australia turning into the UK, and that's why we've got to lower
Exactly. So
immigration right back down.
I think ignoring the problem, pretending the problem doesn't exist, or silencing anybody that talks about it is not going to help. I think that we actually need to talk more about this. But I want to thank you for your time, for the open discussion. I think we went a bit. We went, head to head a little bit there, but that's what a healthy democracy is about. Do you think you're going to win in the election?
I'm up against it, but I'll give it I'll try my hardest, and I'm here till June 30th, and I'll fight until that day. And if I get back in, well, I'll fight another 6 years, and if I don't, I don't. But I want to make sure that I fight hard, and and not do what a lot of my colleagues do is sit there and keep their mouths shut because they're afraid of getting in trouble by their colleagues, or they won't get promoted. There's too much of that, and we've got to call it out. And I'll call it out before I leave if I don't, get back in, because it's killing progress in this country. We are allowing ourselves, politicians who should be leaders, are allowing themselves to be controlled by vested interests and loud voices, and it's not good for the country.
Like my T-shirt says, defund them. Maybe your T-shirt soon. Thanks, mate.
Okay, thanks, Avi. Have a great day.